Well, hey everybody, welcome to the Branch Podcast. My name's Chris, and I am one of the pastors here at the Tree.Church. And today, we are joined with Pastor Anthony and Pastor Matthew, and we've got a great conversation in store for you as we recap Pastor Tim's message and talk about science and faith in more in depth. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So I can remember being younger, like when I'm talking younger, like high school, junior high, and I just remember loving science class. And for whatever reason, the things that always kind of stuck out to me were like the experiments. Was there anything like, first of all, did you guys like science class when you were in high school, junior high? And what was kind of your favorite like experiment that you guys got to do?
I had horrible science teachers in high school. There were so many, like just the worst. So they basically killed that for me. But I remember as a kid learning the idea of like a chemical reaction, specifically the volcano, right? Like, where you had vinegar with, was it baking soda? And put a little food coloring in there. Like that was like the coolest thing in the world to me. But I remember like with my kids, what was interesting, all four of my kids had Miss Kostick, who goes to our church, had her as a fourth grade teacher. And specifically when she taught them science, she was the best science teacher because she did experiments with them. Like all of them said like they loved her. She was like their favorite teacher. They loved science. And then unfortunately, a lot of them the next couple of years, it went way down because they didn't have teachers that did experiments with that same energy. And then when they started having teachers again, their interest went up. But so for me personally, I just remember like the chemical reaction. Then I also remember, this not really a science experiment, but I remember dissecting things, and it was like one part fascinating and one part disgusting. But it was super fascinating for them to know, like we did frogs, and like to see like the different things inside of them was like, wow, that is crazy. How, and that was like probably the first time in my life that I realized like living things are incredibly complex. And like all this works together. And so,
for me, apart from the chemical reaction stuff, like on the surface, that stuff is really cool, but I hated chemistry. Like I just thought chemistry was super hard. We had a great teacher. He was like, honestly, probably one of the best teachers in the high school. Like everybody loved him, great personality, super funny, but chemistry as a subject was just awful for me. So actually my senior year, I don't know, like looking back, this is hilarious to me because I didn't have to do this, but I ended up taking physics. Like you had to choose one. I took physics and then I took advanced biology, which I don't know, like looking back, I'm like, why did I do that? Why did I take two sciences? I don't know. But advanced biology was sweet because of what you just said. Like I think we dissected three different things. We did a frog, we did the fetal pig, which is basically just like the small like baby pig. And then this is going to maybe trigger some people, but we did cats. So the whole cats thing, I remember like the couple of my buddies were in the same class as me and we were like as part of a group, and there was kind of like no boundaries on what you could do in the dissection process. So like even going as far as like the skull and the, like, I mean, like we went all out to basically explore this. And I still remember the smell, the smell of the room was really just gross. It was like a gross smell, but it was also super fascinating. And so that was the part of science that I did really like, just the complexity of human systems and anatomy and even in animals and stuff is just complex.
So first, you guys are the future serial killers of the world, like him and his friends, you know, like dissecting. But I remember in our school, when I was younger, I remember when the older classes, because we were a private school, so we were like all in the same building, when they were dissecting, because you could smell it, like it filled the hallways and you knew like, they're at it again.
It's gross, man.
But then also, I second chemistry, till this day, was the only class I tried in that I couldn't get an A in. Like,
it's hard.
I'm not saying I got straight A's because I didn't, but I'm saying if I tried at a class, I could do it. Chemistry, I remember getting tutored from the teacher, getting tutored by Mary, who was a year older than me, and another friend of mine tutored me, and I just could not grasp chemistry. It was like
there's like a ceiling in your mind. You're just like, I can only go so far, and I don't know, like beyond this, I just can't grasp it. I can't get it.
I barely got a C in chemistry. And I mean, like I just could not figure it out. Like you start putting tens on the back of a number, like you superscript a 10, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what is that? Like,
and I still remember them like saying it like it was so obvious. All you do is this, and this, and this, and that. And it was just like my brain was immediately just playing defense. It was like, nope, like not going to understand any of that.
Mine was the most memorable things always involved either dissection or fire. So I'll add pyromania to my to my whatever that is, psychopath. But yeah, those things always stood out. But I always loved science class, and I think the most memorable science class to me was the one I took my freshman year in college. We had to take like a general biology class, and that is where it just blew my mind. Like when he taught us how to read scientific articles, I was like, oh. Like this is not as sure of a thing as like everybody makes it out to be. Like we're all making theories about these things, and
trying
so
to make sense of stuff.
Trying to make sense of stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. So I have to read things a little bit more critically. And so that was like super memorable for me. So, but the reason I asked is, first of all, just to kind of pick your brains on it a little bit. But this past weekend, Pastor Tim from X-Church came and gave a phenomenal message, just talking about the perceived tension between faith and science. And both the tension that is derived from both ends of it, both science saying that faith is incompatible with scientific fact, and people of faith saying scientific fact is incompatible with what we claim to say is true through faith. And so I just want to take some time, and we all chose a not random set of questions, but like questions that were important to us to dive in deeper to the things that Tim was talking about. And so I'm just going to kick it off, and then we'll just kind of go round robin and like just talk about the different things we want to talk about here regarding faith and science. So the first question that I want to ask is, what requires more faith, believing everything came from nothing or believing that there is a creator?
Yeah. So let me clarify something real quick. What's funny is we all are actually reading each other's questions, because one of the weird dynamics of this podcast is whoever hosts picks the topic and then asks the questions. And one of the weird dynamics is if you pick the topic, good chances are you like that topic.
Yeah.
And you don't get the chance
to talk as much.
Yeah.
You ask the question. So we said, hey, why don't we just rotate? So that question was my question, because if I didn't bring Tim in, that's actually was going to be the angle I went with.
Okay.
Was I think and this is, I'm glad I brought Tim in, because he did a better job of like what the series is about, of like kind of resolving this tension. I was basically going to come in hot, being like, you just have to acknowledge, I think it requires just as much, if not more, faith to believe that everything came from nothing than it does to believe in a creator.
Yeah.
So like years ago, I taught a message on that where I was saying like, we just need to understand when we look at science, first of all, I mean, the belief of science, there are just some things like there was nothing and it exploded into everything. But then when it exploded into everything, it exploded into this very organized everything. So there's chaos, but there's also what's referred to in science as the fine tuning, that they recognize in our universe, it is fine tuned to allow life. And it's just like if one thing is off of like a long list that they're discovering, and they keep adding to this list, if one thing is off, then life's not even possible anywhere in the universe. And so then there had to be one planet that was like perfectly designed and made to even host life. And then on that planet, something inanimate became living. And it's just the same way that nothing became everything, something dead became living, and then evolved into the complexity of all the different things. And in my mind, I go, listen, like just if you remove Christian and faith and just use your brain, I think you can look at it and realize, no, there's something behind this. And that's what I would say. Like, even if you don't believe in the God of the Bible, I still think intellectually you have to look at it and say, there's a designer, there's a creator and designer behind it. And so like from that point on, I think if you want to be intellectually honest, we could debate it. Like I know people that I'm close with actually believe, that are not people of faith. I've heard them talk about it, that they actually believe it's probably more realistic in their minds that like some form of alien beings like initiated life as we know it on Earth. And I go, you know what? That's more intellectually honest to me than saying like it all came from
something
nothing.
From nothing.
And so like, whereas again, I am a person of faith, so I believe that the Bible has revealed, because I believe Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection and came through with it. So like, I follow him, I trust him, and he endorsed as himself as a creator. So like, that's my thing of faith. But I would just say, if you're intellectually honest, I think you have to see intelligent design.
Well, and I think too, even if you are, and I don't want to say if you're a person of science, because you can be a person of science and a person of faith, but if you're a person of science who rejects any concept of faith, I think you have to be, again, if we're saying being intellectually honest, you have to acknowledge what science actually is, right? If it's the observation of things, if it's studying what we have, like based on what we have available to us, at some point you have to realize your argument only goes so far. Because even if you're like, well, I believe in the Big Bang, great. Because I actually think in a lot of ways, the Big Bang only illustrates what the Bible actually teaches as far as what we can tell. But there still has to be something behind that. And so you still have to grapple with the reality is there is a boundary that science only goes so far, and then it can go no further in this particular matter. So at the very least, in my opinion, you can only be agnostic, right? In the sense of you can say, we don't really know, right? You could maybe, to me, that is more honest to say, I don't know for sure. Maybe you don't specifically believe in a God, but to take the form of atheism to say, well, I don't believe there is a creator. I don't believe there is a designer. I think to some degree is intellectually dishonest, because you're saying, like, whatever caused this, like it had no purpose. It had no guiding. There was nothing guiding behind it. But I do think at the end of the day, you have to say, well, I'm limited as a person who believes in science and rejects faith, that science can't actually answer this question, and it can't get behind the answer, because we don't know, right, what caused the Big Bang. We don't know how somehow something that wasn't alive became alive, how out of chaos there became order. So I think you have to, even at the very least, say there's the limiting aspect to what we can answer with that.
But I think that's where a lot of people they're not intellectually honest, is that faith, and Tim said this on Sunday, science becomes scientism really fast, and that is a faith system. And so but there's no acknowledgement of that, you know what I mean? And so like when you fail to recognize and realize that you've stepped across that just mere observation to the faith system, if they look the same and smell the same, but it's an illusion, is what I'm trying to say. I was going to come up with an analogy, but I'm terrible at those things. So it just essentially becomes this illusion of, we've equated science with scientism, and the two are just completely different. I mean, even the thing that you were saying, Matthew, that step process that everything has to fall in line. I remember you're the one who turned me on to this book, Darwin's Black Box. That book was like mind blowing to me, because we take for granted the idea of evolution as it plays out, as it's given to us in, I would say, cultural means.
Right.
And when we stop and we look at the gaps that are in evolutionary theory, you quickly start to realize where faith comes into play, and like you start to put inference into those empty spaces. Right. I think they cannot figure out why the human eye would have ever evolved, or how the human eye.
Like, how would it know that it was something to be seen?
Yeah.
Same thing with smell. Same thing with hearing.
Yeah.
How would it know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have to just keep in mind, like, I think we have to approach everything. And I love the way that you guys said it. We have to keep in mind, like, this is a faith. Scientism is a faith system, and it requires just as much faith, if not more faith, than Christianity, revealed truth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for me personally, I want to be intellectually honest from both angles, because I think at times when science clearly proves something and Christians won't accept it, and based on, I would say, like, from my perspective, would be either a too literal reading of something that wasn't meant to be literal in the Bible, or just from their own traditional convictions, and they're ignoring it. I would say, okay, well, you're not being intellectually honest, because this thing has been proven. And in the same way that we would look at that, or same way we'd look at them and say, you got to be honest, I think we have to be honest too.
100%.
And so, like, that's the tension.
Well, that was actually the question I was going to ask. So that was a great segue into that. Like, are Christians wrong to question things that have a common consensus in the scientific community? Like, are Christians wrong to do that? Should Christians do that? And if so, like, when, right? When should we do that as Christians? And is it based off a literal reading of scripture? Right. When should we give pushback, or should we give pushback at all to scientific consensus?
For me, how I view this is, one of the things I've said in the past, I think all of us to some degree have said this, is when you're wrong and you get pointed out that you're wrong, it's an exciting moment, because now you learn something and now you're right. And now you can be excited that you're right. I
know the truth.
I have almost that element when, if science so clearly proves something that I maybe understood a different way in Christian faith, then I go, now I'm excited to figure out how this works. I'm excited to figure out how this works with faith, because I don't see those in opposition to each other. Because here's what we know, like science isn't going to disprove the resurrection of Jesus, right? So like, there's not something so solid in my faith that I'm nervous about that. Yeah. It's just like, if you find out that even the dating system of how old something is, like if that messes up your convictions, I think you can take a step back and go, okay, well, hold on. Is there another way to view this? Is there another way to understand this? Yeah. Now, that said, I would say where I push back is I think there are some things in science that aren't scientific facts or scientific laws.
They're theories.
They're theories that are being passed off on that.
Yeah.
And that's
as laws.
Yes. And that's where I get annoyed to go, hey, even by your guys' own standards, you can't just go, well, we can't technically prove it, but we all know it. And I'm like,
we all know it to be true.
Yeah. I'm like, no. So you can't, like, I've often said this about conspiracy theories. Like, you're entitled to believe whatever one you want, but you can't get mad at me for not believing your conspiracy theory.
Right.
I feel the same way. If you believe a theory is so solid in your mind that it should be a law, it's okay if you want to believe that, but you can't get upset at me and judge me because I don't, because I want to honor the standards of science.
Well, this goes back to the thing I said about that professor that I had in college. Like, his whole point was like, learn to read things critically. Don't take things at face value as fact, when in reality, because so much gets presented as like gospel truth, for lack of better terms. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so be willing to think critically, be willing to do the study, to like go back and look and check sources, and because none of us are perfect. We're all trying to convey things, whether it be accidental, like an overstatement, or whether somebody missed data or whatever, and they were wrong in their assumptions. And you know what I mean? Like, there's a whole host of things that could be reasons why something that gets claimed as truth is not necessarily truth. And then even coming from the other side, where like you were talking, Matthew, we as Christians have to be intellectually honest, but coming to a place where we don't have to stand on things that aren't necessarily like key core truths that we say are key core truths, for lack of better terms. You know what I mean? So, and when I think about that, is like the spectrum that Tim gave of ways to read Genesis, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the ways to read Genesis, that those all fall within a biblical framework. So we're not working outside of Scripture, but that we have to come to terms with the fact that there might be different ways to see the way we perceive things, and maybe our way of perceiving it isn't quite on.
Yeah, I think the other part I would just say, like, not assuming, because I think for a lot of, like, particularly fundamentalist Christianity has really taught this a lot, that there's almost this assumption that science is the enemy of Christianity, or that the goal of science is somehow to disprove Christianity. And so I think a lot of Christians almost have a mindset of skepticism towards the scientific community in general. So I think, number one, not assuming that, right? Not assuming that everything is necessarily trying to undermine the Christian worldview. But I think realizing, being able to put into different categories, like where there is scientific theory, what is being proposed is, this is our best understanding or explanation of this particular thing. And that's where we as Christians can say, well, that is your explanation of how, human life began. Okay, well, my understanding as a Christian is different in that I believe that God is the source behind that. So while this might be a theory that is within the scientific community, we have to understand that they're operating out of a completely different worldview, which is one that is not necessarily including faith. And I'm not saying that there aren't scientists who aren't Christians, because there are. But what I'm saying is, when they're presenting scientific research, they are not coming at it from that worldview. And so to be able to push back on specific theories that maybe do undermine the Christian worldview, in saying, no, that there is an actual uncreated creator who is the source behind everything, and that we aren't simply just animals with no purpose on the earth, but that God created things with a specific intent and purpose. So I think being able to distinguish between, this is a theory that is being proposed because it's the best explanation that they have, versus specific things that have actually been proven, like they're observable things in the world, that we can say, oh, that's really neat, that we can have a better understanding about how this particular thing actually works.
All right, so that's a great lead into a question that's been on my mind for years. No, I'm just kidding. This is one that with Anthony, but I think it's a great lead into this. So Christians for a long time basically had Genesis as not just a book of theology, but also of science. That we would read it literally like it's scientifically explaining what took place. How should be, and that's the question, is the creation account in Genesis meant to answer scientific questions, theological questions, or both?
Yeah, I think it's primarily why over the how. I would say that the how is still obviously addressed in that God is the how, right? God is the one who brought things into existence. But I would say, and I taught this several weeks ago when I was talking about the purpose of Scripture, I think the main purpose, right, is God revealing himself, God revealing who he is, what he's like, how he does things. And so I think if you have that lens on and understand Genesis, that it is primarily about theology. So it's the purpose is that there is a good God who stands outside of time and space, and he is the uncreated creator. He's the source behind everything. He creates the world in love, right? And one of the things we know, and I know you've talked about this before, like ancient Near Eastern literature, had all these other competing narratives of how the world came into existence, that it was, polytheistic, multiple gods that battled one another, and basically out of bloodshed and out of the dead bodies of these so-called gods, that's how the earth was created. And so Genesis proposed a completely different idea that God created things in love with a purpose and intent, and that he created human beings in his image, not to be slaves, not to be necessarily subjected, but to work alongside him as co-creators. And so that's a long explanation to your question, but I think that's the main purpose of it, right? It's not getting into the nitty gritty details of how did this actually take place, but more so of the why. Like why did God do this? And really, what does it reveal both about God himself, and I think even what does it reveal about human beings in our relationship to God and our relationship to the world?
Yeah, and I think when you take that why, you can start to approach the text from the way that it looks like it was intended to be read. And I think that's the tripping point for so many people, where they go like, I see this, it has to be this literal like it says day, so it's got a literal 6 days of creation. You know what I'm saying? And so like you look at that from the English perspective and you go, that's what it's got to be. If it's true, everything has to be scientifically true, historically true, like locked in. But what if the text is if the main purpose is to convey God's theological idea and convey that God is the one who is the author and perfecter and completer of creation. If he is that one, then that text doesn't have to be the literal, and this makes it sound like there shouldn't be a literal reading of it. That what I mean is we can approach the text how it was intended to be read. And so we think that the literal factual reading is the best way to read something. Well, that's a 21st century assumption. That's not how ancient Israelites thought about God. It's not how they thought about history. It's not how they thought about the world. And so they took what they understood and explained it in a way that they understood, and God revealed himself through that text. So why can't we read it as poetry, or why can't we read it as these very layered stories that are historically rooted in that they're true and that God stepped into history and created the world, but it's teaching these ideas that Anthony was saying. And when we can go, I can see that allows for, like what Tim said this past weekend, that allows for us to then go, oh, there could be some coinciding on how this played out. And I don't know if we'll talk about the different theories or whatnot. I think the evolution one is harder to get out of the text. But I think if you look at some of the other ones that he pointed out, I think there leaves a lot of leeway for holding to the biblical idea of Adam, holding to the biblical idea of Eve, of the fall. And like you can have these things take place and still contend with the book of science that he talked about as well.
You helped me a lot understand the different types of writing 2,000 years ago and beyond, because I did have such a 21st century mindset. So like in our writings today, if you're reading a news article, you expect it to be factually true, chronologically in order, right? Like there's the way that we read things. And you helped me understand, like even in the Gospels, it was not considered dishonest for them to tell a story out of order,
to rearrange it,
to rearrange things, because their audience would not have been offended by that, would not have felt like they were being deceived, because everyone understood this is not meant to be this literal in order account, the specific facts, even leaving out key things because it didn't play into whatever narrative they were trying to communicate. And I remember like when you were explaining that to me years ago, I was like, oh, okay. and I read scripture differently, and I go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes more sense. Like it removed a tension that, because I just felt like when you find out, well, this isn't literal and this isn't exactly, and why does this gospel account say it this way and this gospel account says it this way?
Yeah.
They're obviously talking about the same thing, but they're talking about it differently. You felt like, are they undermining each other? And you go, no, it's completely two different target audiences. And then you helped me even like with Revelation, even specifically talking about apocalyptic literature and how it was written and the purpose and like the imagery that's being used, and their audience would have understood it that way.
Yeah.
And again, I'm trying to read it through a mindset of like our modern day. So Genesis is the same way. Like I'm reading it going like, this reporter is telling me that in 6 days it says this, not realizing that's not how it was written. That's not how the audience would have taken it.
Yeah.
And it freed me up to go, oh, okay.
Well, and that lets us go like, so the literary structure of if you look at the parallels that play out throughout that first telling, Genesis 1, you really do get this sense of like, this is a work of art displaying the creative power of God in the universe. You know what I mean? And so like you get things that are scientifically paradoxical, where God creates light first, but then you don't see stars till like day 4. Well, that's scientifically problematic unless, you know what I mean? Unless you think the authors must be doing something else there.
Right.
He's telling us something different by laying these parallels, day 1, day 4, day 2, day 5, you know what I mean? Like, and so forth and so on. So when you start to see those things start to play out, you can go, okay, so he's doing a piece of art that's telling us theological truth that is also rooted in a reality that we believe God is the one who created all of these things. And so like, I don't see them as necessarily always at tension with each other, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So this whole conversation is interesting because I've seen a lot of like just people online that, you know, they bash Christians, right? And they bash Christians from the standpoint of like, if you believe this stuff, then you must be unintelligent. And so one of my questions is, why is it that the younger generation is really being taught that they kind of have to choose, right? You kind of have to choose between almost a form of intellectualism or faith. Both of these can't exist. And I realize this is maybe a more loose question, not necessarily directly related to science, but it is. There's an overlapping dynamic here of that. There's an association with science. You have intellectualism, right? You're coming from academia, this mindset of being well learned, and then you have faith over here, which is just a bunch of people who check their minds at the door when they enter the church, and they're just assuming these things are true. So why is this the case, and how can we maybe reconcile these two things?
I'm trying to think of how far back I want to go with this question, because I really do think that like a lot of it is rooted in the common problem of humanity. We try to make sense of the world to the best of our understanding while shedding off the demand of God. And so autonomy is the word that we use quite often, while becoming autonomous and making sense of the world and making this world what we want it to be, without God's design, without God's restraints, God's structure on us. And I think that's a very it's a very ancient temptation that is still very much alive and active today. And so like we will do everything we can to make explanations and sell something as truth that sheds that burden of God off of us. And so like if you look at the trends in history, so for a long time, and a lot of times the trending cultures will happen because in reaction to the church did something terrible. I mean, you come out of the Middle Ages, you have the Inquisitions, you have the hundreds and hundreds of years of war that took place between the Catholics and the Protestants. And that's when you start to funnel into this place called the Enlightenment. And that's when we get modernism. And then postmodernism says all that. Well, these are all kind of reactions to an overly dogmatic church that is pretty much persecuting non-believers. Well, along comes the Enlightenment, modernism, and they go, well, we don't need revelation anymore. Those things are all myth. That's all mystery. We can't prove that. So we found a way to go, we don't need God anymore. We can make sense of the world by ourselves. And so it becomes almost a flip to now this is the most popular way of thinking about things.
Sure.
The thing that you said, scientism and whatnot, materialism. And so because that's the predominant thought, it becomes really easy to go, what a bunch of idiots that still hold to that ancient mythical superstitious view. You know what I mean? In reality, we're both operating from the same sets. You know what I mean? We are either putting faith in one or we're putting faith in the other. And yes, science does have observations. So like, I'm not talking about like scientific observation.
Sure.
I'm talking about the thought that typically comes from the people that this is the only worldview that's acceptable.
I would agree 100%. I mean, that was going to be my answer is, and this is what's fascinating. I would take it just a step further is, I think in the tension between the scientific world and faith world, they do want to throw off any constraints that God puts on them. And so there is an anti-God, there's a desire to be autonomous. But what's interesting in our culture today is, I would say both the scientific world and the secular world view the faith world as the enemy. So like what's interesting is they would say, okay, we have science, we can disprove things of faith, but then there are scientific things that now the secular world is ignoring. I mean, even when we talk about things of like gender and where they're saying like, no, you can just define whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so even in the secularism, they're saying like, we don't even want the constraints now if it applies to science. And so like, we don't want science restrictions. We don't want faith restrictions. We just want total autonomy. And you're seeing this weird dynamic. It's like everyone against God, because nobody wants to serve God. No one wants to worship God. And even this Sunday, as I conclude this series, I'm going to talk about that tension. Actually, the title of the message this Sunday is Deconstructing the Wrong God. And I think that's one of the temptations is they're trying to deconstruct God because they want to make themselves God. People do. And there's that tension. And so I think that's why we're seeing that.
You know, I remember several years ago during my master's program, I wrote like it was one of the probably the bigger papers I had to write, but I wrote it on postmodernism and like basically the church's response to that. Like, how do we think about it? One of the things that I found in some of the articles that I was reading was basically this common consensus that postmodernism has gone too far to where it's become super destructive because of even what you're saying about like in secular culture, the rejection of even like scientific stuff, like things that have been proved, things that are observable. There's like almost an extreme skepticism of that. And I do think it goes back to this desire to be completely autonomous and not be bound by even any objective truth outside of oneself. On the flip side, I think to that question, I think the church has also not done a great job. So like in some ways, we've given ammunition to this whole argument of like, either you can be intellectual or you can be a Christian. You can't be both because the church has done a really poor job of swimming in those waters. And so I would say part of it has been an overly rigid, literal, dogmatic reading of scripture and an approach to some of these topics. I think the other ones have been things that we've talked about in the past, many times on the podcast, shutting down questions, not opening up, like not creating space for people to wrestle. And I think so some of the things that we have done as a church have also probably reinforced some of the views that are coming out of kind of a secular mindset. And so I think we have to be mindful of that. We have to be firm in our convictions and our beliefs as far as our Christian worldview, but at the same time, be willing to articulate it in intelligent ways, right? In tactful ways. And I think the other big thing I would say is we have also just done a poor job of actually portraying the Christian worldview. One of my actual arguments in that specific paper is I think Christianity, if it is true, and we believe it's true, has the most compelling, beautiful vision for a life of flourishing for the world. And so if that's true, we have to do a better job of conveying that vision to people. And I think that's another thing the church has done a really poor job of, because when the world sees Christianity, that's not what they see. Like you said, they see it as an enemy. They actually see it as a hindrance to progress and flourishing, rather than giving a more compelling vision of this is actually how you were created to function and flourish.
Well, it's funny now, like there has been a swing away from like strict materialism more towards spiritual things. But even in that conversation, it's still there's still a level of we're going to do it how we want, and there's a rejection of God, for lack of better terms, for spiritual things, because there is a sense of there's something more to the world than what we can just see. But so we don't want scientism. We don't want, we don't want traditional Christianity in any way, shape, or form. So we've got to come up and create our own, and it creates just as many problems. So
I mean, true postmodernism, if you follow it to its final like its belief system, It's that truth needs to be defined by every generation, but even every region, which is an interesting idea. So like a true postmodernist would say like every community in every generation needs to define their own truth. And when you think about how radical that is, I mean, and we see it. I mean, you see like communities like, I'm just going to speak in kind of broad terms here. Some of the communities in California that just from like our perspective being in the Midwest, just look like they've lost their mind.
Sure.
Like giving up crime and just saying like even having laws that if they're not going to prosecute anything that's stolen under $500. I mean, you're like, wait, what? They're not going to enforce this law or that law. They're going to allow, and you just look at it and go, what? But that's true postmodernism but that's what that culture has decided it's okay. And so like, we can't judge them. And so like that concept really is the human nature of wanting true autonomy. The reason they reject what you said is like traditional Christianity is because traditional Christianity tells them how they have to live and act, and they just don't want that. So they get to create their own God in their own image and worship that God, and everyone else needs to celebrate them. And that's what true postmodernism is.
Yeah. All right. So let me ask this question, guys. And it's a little bit of shift of what we were just talking about, but it takes us back into something we introduced earlier, was this idea of evolution. And does evolution automatically conflict with belief in God? Does it conflict with how we view creation? Does it have to? I guess is the.
For me, there's a tension, and so like you guys know me, I'm pretty open-minded in the sense of like if I found out that God used evolution, it wouldn't like shatter my faith or anything like that.
Yeah.
But where I have a conflict is just a couple of questions, and I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. For me, true evolution requires a lot of death. And I'm just not sure if death was going to be a part. And what I mean by that is like, otherwise you're going to have billions and billions and billions of like bad creatures, right? Because
natural selection.
Yeah.
Yep.
So like there has to be a lot of death. And so was evolution and what was death? And this is the thing I don't know. Was death going to be a part of creation? Maybe, because we see that there's a tree tree of life that if they eat from, they get to live. So like it seems by implication that anything that didn't have access to the tree of life would die.
Right.
And so maybe death was a part of it. So that's one tension. But then also it's kind of just the why. Why would God need evolution? Maybe he didn't need it. Maybe that's not even the right way to look at it. So then I would say, what would be the purpose of it?
Yeah.
Where it seems like in scripture, the idea of made in the image of God seems to be an immediate thing to me.
Yeah.
And so that's the tension I feel as I go, I don't know that there's death. I don't know that there's a purpose, but I also see made in the image of God, both Adam and Eve. Again, I am reading that account somewhat literal because there are enough, I think, specific things in there to say there are some literal elements of the creation narrative there that God formed him out of the dust, breathed life into him, took out of him a part, made Eve, brought Eve to him. That doesn't feel figurative to me. That feels fairly literal. So that'd be my tension.
Yeah, I think where you ended is to me like the center of my argument for why I wouldn't hold to evolution. Though I would agree with what you said. Like if I were to find out someday, like, oh, like this is how God chose to do it. Again, it wouldn't shake my faith because at the end of the day, he's still the one behind it.
Right. Yeah.
But I do think there are some potential like theological hiccups as far as when you look at the Genesis account, because if one of the focal points of creation is human beings being made in the image of God. I mean, you have over and over again, God saw it and it was good. After human beings entered the picture, he saw all that he created. It was very good, right? And there's some special, designation given to human beings in the Genesis account that God made them unique, that they weren't like the other animals. And not only were they not like the other animals, they were given specific charge over all of the other animals and over the earth to have a unique relationship with God, but also to do the work of God over creation. So to me, there's a massive distinction here. And I've shared this before, because one of the theological questions is like, well, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? And I think it's a lot of things. But one of the things I still remember, one of my theology professors at Malone said this. He said, human beings are the only creations within the world that could actually destroy the world. Like you think about it, a lion isn't going to destroy the world. A bear isn't going to destroy you name any other animal or living creature isn't going to destroy the world. I mean, right now we have literally weapons of mass destruction, nuclear warheads that have the capacity to destroy and end civilization as we know it. That there's a uniqueness to being a human being that God has designated for us, that we are able to do things that other creatures are not able to do. And I think you see that from the beginning. This is not something that happened later on, that God gives this specific charge to human beings. And I think the other thing is the specific nature of God's covenantal love towards his creation, but specifically towards human beings. That I think one of the chief things it means to be made in the image of God is to have this special loving relationship with God that all other animals on earth do not have. I mean, even Jesus alludes to some of these things, right? Like, when he talks about the sparrows, and he basically says, in paraphrase, like, you are far more important than even the animals on the earth, like to God. Yeah. You are made in his image. You are unique and special. And so I think because of those reasons, I would have a really hard time landing on an evolutionary understanding of that.
I think some of the places where, so I'm not going to contradict you guys. The question mark, these are questions that I wrestle through in my mind when I think about it, because I don't read it and see an evolutionary kind of like leaning from the creation story. But the question marks that I have in my mind is, so like you get with the book of science, it's pretty well established that for a really long time, there were mass groups of humans like that were on the planet. And so like, I'm trying my best to reconcile that with my seventh grade brain that was asking in my catechism class, so where did Adam and Eve's kids get wives from? Like, what I'm saying? Like all those questions that we have as young people that we think we're stumping our pastor. Those are the question marks of that Genesis just does not tell us.
Sure.
Right. And assumes other human beings around at the same time. What do we do with that? Mm-hmm. Well, it could be that, there were more than just Adam and Eve and their family, and that doesn't have to be incompatible with the importance of Adam and Eve and the importance of what they were doing. But then there's also the part of me that goes like, it's very explicit that man was made from the dust, and you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so like you get this first man, first woman that is very clearly described. And so like those are the tensions that I wrestle around in my mind, and I don't have a clear answer for it if I could be honest, because the text doesn't tell us, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. The other thing I just was thinking about, this is like total speculation. Like, is it possible that human beings weren't necessarily created through evolution, but that other animals and creatures were, right? Like, because you think about, if you want to like distinguish it between micro and macro evolution being more around adaptation. Like, I think that is observable. I think we see that in the world where I mean, even like within a species, right? Dogs, like there are dogs that exist now that didn't exist 100 years ago, 200 years ago, like breeds of dogs. And so you see like variations of that. And so is it possible that human beings were created in God's image to be very distinct, and that other animals God created, there was something within that mechanism that he intended for them to change over time and adapt? Sure. And I think there's even within that a spectrum that could exist that would also maybe lend itself why scientific inquiry says, hey, we see some of these things and this is why we lean this way.
Yeah. In the one book you referenced that I gave to you a while ago, Darwin's Black Box, there's another one about the same time that I suggested that was also talking about it. Basically, this guy was a scientist, and he explains why evolution as they teach it now it's scientifically impossible, because evolution requires DNA. DNA is by definition information. Information means there has to be someone that put that information there. Yeah. So it has to be a creator. And so like that's the other part about it, is the only evolution in my mind that I could ever even reconcile would be a God ordained, directed type of it. And at that point, is it even evolution at that point as much as it's just purpose creation? So that is, again, just the tension that I feel in my heart, where I go, God's behind it all, no matter what.
Yeah, well, and there that too. Like, even if you look at, and I need to fact check this, so I'm going to say it softly. But I've heard from like a couple different places that like certain advancements even take place worldwide at the same time. So like you start to see like farming, for instance. People go from hunter-gatherers to agrarian at like all the same time, all across the world. Like, and so like
aliens.
Yeah. Or God.
Throw a wrench into this whole conversation.
The world would go aliens. And we're like, no, God.
Yeah. So like you do see where like these steps in advancement and things like that have been guided by
well, and some believe,
you know what I mean?
Some believe too, like the idea of evolution is that there could have been like where at some point, from how close the ape is to human, at some point, when they got to that condition, when God breathed into them, that's when they became in the image of God. So that is one of the theories that even on that spectrum. And so you might see at that point, not only is God's image breathed into them, but obviously another level of intelligence, and you see a progression in that way.
Well, what is the difference between ape and man? Like 0.0, like
that's been debated. I don't know. I mean,
either way, the
we also share like a lot of similar DNA to like other banana and ridiculous things. So,
but my point was going to be like, we have all of this that's similar, but the parts that are different are vastly different. Like, and there are no examples that we know of that make that type of leap.
All right, so let's throw one more wrench in this. Okay, so we've talked about creation. What about the age of the earth? Does it actually matter to the truth of Christianity? Because some people, they have the literal 6-day creation. Oftentimes, if it's literal 6 days, they also believe in a young earth, which if they track the genealogy in Genesis as it connects to the ones in the gospel, they're figuring it's roughly about 6,000, upwards of 10,000.
6 to 10,000
years. And so there's one view of that, but then there's scientific things that would point to like dinosaurs and stuff that would be millions, hundreds of millions of years. So does the age of the earth actually matter?
I'll start that one, and this is the one that I'd probably die on a bigger hill than I probably should. But the language,
old earth. Old, I want to hear you say it, Chris.
I am an old earth creationist. So I think the language of the term
Chris
for
is
day.
Getting some emails.
I think this one is way easy to explain away without going into. For one, the language the language of day, and Tim kind of alluded to this on this weekend. Like it means way more than a literal single day. The other part of it is genealogies are not they're not meant to date time. Like they have other purposes for their writing. So they may not even be like complete, like generation to generation.
They might be highlighting certain individuals.
Yeah, because if you look at all the genealogy, a lot of them differ. Even in the midst of Scripture, like one will be one way, one will leave somebody out, one will add somebody, and it's all for the purpose of what they're trying to accomplish with the genealogy. So like that to me is like you're standing on some faulty ground, I think, to come up with that. And so for me, it's way more tenable for it to be to be an older earth, or at least I'll say it this way, that we don't understand the length of the day that's spoke of in Genesis. So I'll say it that way.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is no, it doesn't matter unless your entire theological framework starts with the assumption that it has to be literal, right? If you start there, then obviously, like if that's a dogmatic thing for you, then when that's contested, that's going to be a house of cards that feels like it's collapsing. But I don't think it should be, again, because of everything that we've already talked about. I don't think we have to take it literally. I don't think it has to be making scientific statements. I don't think that's what Genesis was intended to be, or the Bible in general. So I think at the end of the day, this is an area where we could say, I don't think it really changes the theological discourse around what we actually believe about God and human beings and other things. The other thing, I love the idea of like with old earth creationism too. It's like, do we ask ourselves, when God created some of these things, like we assume Adam was created in a mature state, is it possible that the world was created in a more mature state, right? And which is why the way that we now date the earth looks differently, that there's not an exact connection there, because if God created creatures and Adam and Eve and human beings in a mature state, is it possible that the rest of the earth was also created in a similar way? So I think there's a lot of different theories that go in there, but I don't think any of them necessarily need to be kind of a, black and white. I have to for sure hold to this, and if I don't, then my entire Christian faith crumbles.
Yeah, I'm the exact same way, because if you look at both theories, and I'm oversimplifying these, but if you go young earth, what you're saying is God is the creator. He's the designer behind it. He spoke, it happened. Okay, that's one. The other old earth is God is the creator. He's a designer behind it. He spoke, it happened. But he spoke on one period of time, one day, as using that phraseology. But that could have been then that could have been 1 billion years as the planets were moving and things were coming in, because we know that like stars were created, and when stars were created, that even introduced into the universe elements that are needed for life. Like, so he could have started that process. And then after 1 billion years, when things were just primed and ripe ready for the next thing, he goes, okay. And he speaks the next day, and then he speaks, so, and he used designed evolution, like, all of it, he's still the initiator of it. Yeah. So it doesn't change our faith. He's still the creator. It doesn't even change the account in scripture at all. And that's a part of it. Like, so there's a guy that I really like, Hugh Ross. And Hugh Ross was the one that kind of introduced it. So Hugh Ross's theory is that humans were made roughly like 125, 150,000 years ago. So his was like creation. So it wasn't evolution. It was just like creation, day one, however much time, then day 2, God spoke, then day 3, God spoke. So on day 6, when God spoke, that's about 150,000 years ago. And this guy's a scientist. He's incredibly intelligent. And I remember when I first read it, where I didn't necessarily in my mind go like, okay, now I 100% agree with him. But in my mind, I went, oh man, I love that, in the sense of like, there's just another layer of beauty to me in my mind of God, of going, oh, how cool is that God, if the earth is and the universe is like 13.6 billion years ago, that God spoke knowing like, I'm starting something right now, putting into motion that's going to play out over 13.6 billion years. How intelligent is God, right? How powerful, how beautiful. So to me, I went either or. If God did it in a moment, how awesome is our God? If he did it over 13.6 billion years, how awesome is our God? Right. So my faith doesn't shake at all.
And I think that really lines up with the way that scripture lays out so many of these difficult questions that we pose in the text. You have a God who is sovereign over all, and yet he creates the world in ways that obviously are ordained by like a natural law, like a process. And so like he's interactive and he's sovereign, but there's natural law. We also recognize he's sovereign even in our lives, and yet we still have free choice. Like we still have choice that we have to make. And so you see all of these things like show up in scripture where one thing looks like it contradicts the other. The two don't look like they should coincide, and yet the Bible leaves the tension in both. And so how possible is it that it could be that God sets these processes in place and yet is still interacting with them and doing what, like everything you just said.
Yeah. So the other thing I was thinking before I asked this other question too is we do forget that like God was outside of time, in the sense of like our framework, everything that we think, like the lens that we think through is through the lens of time. And so scripture is very clear that the time in the way that we relate to it is not the same way that God relates to it. And so I think that's another added dynamic, that it's very hard for us to conceive of that idea because we're not God, right? We don't have an eternal perspective. And so how long it actually took God to create things, and he could have taken his good old time, and he wanted to do that for a specific reason and purpose. The truth is we have a hard time conceiving of that because of our limited mindset. One of the questions I want to ask, though, this is kind of going back into where we started earlier. It's a kind of a different rendition of this question, but how should we think about science when it comes to answering philosophical questions? Because I think this is one of the territories that gets kind of dicey. One of the things you'll see today is people with more of a materialistic worldview are trying to answer philosophical questions from a scientific mindset. How should we think about that? Should that be happening? How should we discern the difference between those types of questions? Is it dangerous to try to answer philosophical questions from a scientific perspective?
Yeah. I mean, there's an inconsistency in that, in my mind, to say it. On one hand, I don't believe in God. I want to disprove God, which therefore you're saying I want to disprove morality. We're all a byproduct of just accident. We just happen. But now we are going to define what is moral. Like, to me, I go, really? I mean, because if we're really truthfully, again, this sounds super harsh, but if you're going to embrace the true concept of evolution, survival of the fittest, then the greatest thing you could ever do is to destroy the weak. I mean, if that's what we're actually talking about, it should be every man for himself, and anyone that is needy, let's destroy them so that as humans, we can get stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's the only morality that you would pull from survival of the fittest is the stronger the strongest need to survive, the weaker need to be destroyed. And so to then say, okay, no, I'm going to just form my own version of morality, at that point, I think it really is dangerous.
Yeah.
And so for me, from my perspective, I think to separate and to answer questions that it's not designed to answer is a dangerous thing.
Yeah. Honestly, my brain just went blank. I had something like, I was listening and I was like,
I'll give you some time,
right.
Because one of the things that you were saying there, I think is actually one of the strongest arguments against science trying to answer, like, this is what you were alluding to this earlier. Our culture is seeing the need for the spiritual because this, like, science cannot answer some of these fundamental questions, or the answers that science gives, they're insufficient, right? So like what you just talked about. So we as a culture, we talk about things like justice and even like charity or acts of compassion. Those things in many aspects, like they're addressing something that completely conflicts with the idea of natural selection, right? Like if a certain society, a certain group of people is stronger than another, like if there's a disparity between them, that is just a part of the order, right? Like naturally we should allow that to happen. And yet there's something deeply within us that contradicts, like a desire to see the weak. Like, so you think about people who are, severely physically or mentally, having disabilities and things like that. Should we then cast those people aside, or should those people be taken care of, right? When your parents or people in society become dependent because they're so elderly, should we cast them aside? Now, here's one of the arguments. So the argument would be, well, we've realized through evolution that communities function a certain way, and we function a certain way, and that's actually better for us. So that's how we can kind of answer that. The problem even for me in that then is even something like love actually doesn't exist. It's really actually just a self-serving mechanism, right? Because it becomes a survival mechanism. So even the concept of love isn't about selflessness for the sake of another. It's actually about doing something so that you can better survive as a part of the community.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think when you start to actually strip some of these philosophical concepts down, you realize, man, if we take this literally, like if the idea of evolution is true, natural selection is true, so much of what we've kind of built our assumptions on from a moral standpoint or a philosophical standpoint deeply contradicts, in that science actually does not have a great answer for why we think this way and operate this way.
Well, and I think what it does is it strips meaning off of life. And so what I mean is, like, science has the ability to strip things down and reduce things down to its most basic parts. And if we feel like, and if we think that those things are only those basic parts, so like the whole concept of love, like, is it just a chemical that fires off in our brain? Like, is it a hormone? You know what I mean? Like, well, probably there are hormones that do fire off when we experience the feeling of love. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Or we do those actions, and so is there chemical? Is there a reductionist like part of it? Then yeah. But if it's just that, the meaning that goes into it, and the meaning that it's meant to, the way it shapes our lives, the way that it's meant to drive everything that we do, like that is all stripped off of what God created us to be as human beings. And so, like, I feel like it shouldn't answer those questions, because you can become over reductionistic you just strip the meaning off of what life is supposed to be. And God's obviously designed us to not just have an existence. We're designed to flourish.
Yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't have emotion. We wouldn't have we wouldn't need love. We wouldn't need companionship. We wouldn't need those things if we were just biological beings trying to survive. Maybe we need components of it, but the joy of it, the meaning of it, the flourishing of it, all stems around the meaning that God puts into and gives and puts on human beings, in my opinion. So
yeah, and I think this goes back to like one of our first questions. I think if we're intellectually honest, we do have to acknowledge, why do we have a tension when we see someone that's hurting and we want to help them, or the person who doesn't help them? Like, why does that stir something inside of us? Like, where is that coming from? Because you look at in the animal kingdom, you don't see that. Like some of the saddest things ever to watch are like National Geographics, right? Or the documentaries where, like, there's two of them. I think the elephant one, like when an elephant just gets old, it just like wanders off by itself to go die. Like it knows, like, I'm no longer valuable to this community, and just goes off. and they're not like throwing a going away party for it. Like there's no, from what you can tell, emotional way. Same thing for lions. Like lions are at the end of their life and they're rejected from the pride. It's like
they're beat by another male lion, and then now they get kicked out.
And they're kicked out.
Yeah.
So like you were a part of this family, you're now weak, you're out of this family. And like that's the animal kingdom, that's the world. And yet we know something deep down inside of us that humans shouldn't act that way, that we should take care of the old, we should take care of the needy, we should take care of the sick. And you go like, just be intellectually honest. Where is that coming from? Because if it's evolution, that's evolution. Yeah. So if we're having something different, then there's something we can't see. Yeah. And so that's the part we have to acknowledge. And that's where I think it's dangerous, is they don't want to acknowledge God. And yet you're going, okay, then where are you pulling your truth from? And at that point, I think it is too subjective. And then that's when you see cultures just do bizarre things. And honestly, it can go bizarre things as in like, where you're seeing some cultures are going to more assisted suicide, celebrating assisted suicide. You even see the convenience of abortion in some cultures, like it's celebrated, like you should do this. And once you do this, we're going to champion you. And you look at that and you go, that's that weird thing. Where's that coming from? You get what I'm saying? So like, that's the tension I feel is like, if you don't have true morality being defined by God, then I think it's going to always be dangerous.
Well, let me ask this question in the same line of like thinking through like our moral compass and whatnot. Scientific advancement is oftentimes seen as a good thing. Like through medicine to even technological advancement is to a degree scientific advancement. And we've seen how it's benefited our lives in so many ways, but the technology and the advancement oftentimes outpaces our morality or the way we think about it morally. How can we and should we think about scientific advancement in light of sticking with the morality that God seems to give to us?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it outpaces our morality just simply because morality is decreasing. If Christians were the ones behind the technology, I don't think it would outpace morality. I think we're just seeing morality on a decline in our culture because we're telling everyone you get to define your own truth. All the things we've talked about, postmodernism, relativism, like all of these things. And so you're seeing people, they're not motivated by love. So it's not love of God and love of people. It's motivated oftentimes by convenience or money. And that's just a dangerous thing. So like when Paul says that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, that's what we're seeing. Like if you're motivated by a love of money and so you want to do technology and you want the convenience of it, like evils are going to happen. And so I think the solution is to get people back to loving Jesus, right? I mean, obviously like getting back to morality. But you do see that tension. I mean, even if you go back to the story of Babel, there's an advancement in technology, and there's even the perspective from God as he looked at humanity. He said, like, if they put their mind to it, there's nothing they can't accomplish. But that group wasn't doing so to honor God. They were motivated by their own selfish ambition. And so I do think that's just a dangerous thing.
Yeah, I think you have to ask the question, like what are the ultimate ends of anything? And so the other way that I would phrase that would be you have to define the target. And so what I mean is like even the concept of progress, like the concept of progress is super arbitrary because progressing to what? Like what is the goal? Who defines that? And for what one person, it seems like progress, another seems like a regression, right? And so I think with technology as Christians, we have to say it's what you alluded to. Is this cultivating human flourishing in the way that God intended it to be? Like, absolutely. Is this bringing us closer in alignment to God's design for human beings in the way that we, interact with one another, the way that we relate to each other, the way that we relate to God, the way that we relate to creation itself? Is the technology, is the stuff that we're developing helping aid in those things? Or is it being used for evil means to actually end up consuming other people and hurting people? And I think that's what's going to happen. So whoever's behind it, whoever's determining the means and the ends, like that's how it's ultimately going to be used. And so this is where Christians should have a voice to say that the thing that's happening there is not in alignment with what God desires and wants for human flourishing. And in fact, I think we talk about it a lot. We're seeing the human experiment unfold around us every day in culture. When people are saying, you should go do this or go do that, or this doesn't matter anymore like it used to, or that's outdated or what, like we're seeing in many ways the things that have been pillars foundational pillars of societies for centuries, for thousands of years even, are now being stripped away. I think this is why you see, the higher mental, health issues and suicide and some of these things, because you're taking away things that God intended to lead to human flourishing. And the more that you remove those, and the more that you say, we don't need any of these boundaries, the more that you're going to see, suffering and pain as a result.
Well, and if we are the ones who are our own gods, we have to fix the problems that we see. And so I think a lot of times we do. The ability becomes a should, because it might erase again what we talked about earlier, erase our need for God.
Yeah,
we might be able to fix our sickness problem. We might be able to fix our death problem. Now, is some of that good? I think so. Yeah, you know what I mean. Like, we've benefited from almost 150 years of medicine, of modern medicine, that has been a higher bump in the quality of life and longevity of human life. That's a good thing, you know what I mean? And I feel like God uses that, but at the same time, I think it's on being on the cutting edge of things, where we have to slow down and start thinking more critically about how these things will impact. And I love that, like, we have to measure the ends, and I think we have to weigh the cost of the means, because I think we don't realize the cost that something for us might be being taken out of someone else. And so that's where, like, even I think back to the debates in the 90s, they were cloning, using stem cells to clone animals and stuff like that. And they were working on, can we clone human beings? Can we do those types of things? Well, some of that was coming from aborted fetuses and the stem cell, and so there's this moral quandary that comes with some of these advancements. And I don't think the hands are clean of any. Like, if you look back on the history of medical advancement, I don't think it's a straight line up and to the right. You know what I mean? So, there's a lot of things that go to that. But I think Scripture and God leads us to the place where not all ends justify every means. And so I think we have to think through that stuff and be careful with it.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Well, guys, that brings us pretty much to the end of our conversation. You guys got any other questions, any other thoughts?
I got two quick things. One is, multiple weeks ago, Anthony talked about intermittent fasting. And Dr. Todd Hansen texted us and was fired up and said that it was bad science. And he said, like, you can intermittent fast and be fine and be healthy.
We'd like to retract our statement.
So we're going to retract our statement. And here's the thing. I didn't even test Todd's thing. So I'm trusting Todd.
I just want to say, that was not some fake article, by the way. So maybe it was based on variables that were too small and they couldn't be replicated. I don't know. All I know, I want to just clear the record. I did not fall for some false article or something. It may very well have just been bad science. So if you want intermittent fast, do it.
Anthony, I trust you. Todd, he came hot at us. And you know what's so funny about that too? Todd, he texted us and then none of us responded. And that's the worst. Like, he was trying to be funny, like, in it. He was funny, but I'm saying, like, he was trying to say, like, I am serious about this, but I don't want you to feel like I'm just coming at you guys.
I'm giving you guys a hard time.
And then none of us responded. And I thought, I was actually telling someone else about the story and laughing, and then I went, "Oh my goodness, we never responded to that." I was waiting for you to respond.
I talked to him on Sunday morning, and it was like, "Todd, I know you're just messing with me."
Okay, I was waiting for you to respond because you were kind of the target, and then once you responded, I was going to respond, and then I
completely forgot. I read it, and I must have been in the middle of something, and I laughed when I read it, and then I just completely forgot. So he was probably for those couple days
sweating.
Like, "Oh man, did I offend him?"
Then the other second thing, I don't know, you were going to say it earlier, but this is our last podcast for the summer because from this point on, none of our schedules align for like weeks, months even. So we have a couple months off.
So enjoy this one. Watch it multiple times throughout the summer if you need to.
Go back and watch the old ones.
Yeah. Get caught up. But thank you guys so much for the conversation today.
Yep.